Um, an aerodynamic brain by Brother Anonymous. 40% whizzed along the narrow roads at warp speed, his windscreen wipers flat out trying to dislodge the torrential rain. He had his favourite country and western CD belting out a dreadful song from the dashboard speakers, something about a scornful woman from Cincinnati whose ex-husband was one bottle of Jack Daniels away from pulling the trigger. He patted Maxie's backpack, which was next to him on the passenger seat, for the umpteenth time, to ensure that he was still a rich man. That evening he hummed along with the song, a little louder than usual, but with an undeniable hint of ridicule in his accompaniment. His newfound fortune had callously demoted his love for this CD to almost disdain. He swerved onto a side road, or laneway to be more precise, throwing up muck and dirt as he navigated the turn. This portion of 40%'s joyride was basically a dirt road, traversed only by farmers in their tractors to interconnect with neighbouring farms. He would challenge his motor skills on this stretch of road when he was excited about something or other, but always when it rained. That Sunday evening he ticked both boxes. He was enjoying the feel of the wheels grabbing and sliding along the slick surface. He had to wrestle constantly with the steering wheel, putting it left and right and left again to rid the wobbles that would otherwise take control of the van and whip it off the road. He felt invigorated by the physical exertion required to keep the speeding van on the road. Mentally, he broke free from the restraints of his financial woes. He was in a good place for the first time since his divorce 14 years ago. As he reached for the skip track button on the console, he felt a massive blow to the driver's side of the van. He failed to avoid the trailer that was parked on that side of the road. It was difficult to see anything through that curtain of rain. The driver's side window imploded and a blast of glass filled the cab. The rear wheels lifted off the road and the back of the van whipped forward, causing it to flip over on its side and tumble repeatedly along the dirt road until it spun over the edge and down the steep embankment. After kicking up big clumps of sod and ploughing through brambles amid breaking branches, it finally came to rest in a cluster of pine tree trunks. 40% was violently ejected through the opening where the windscreen used to be. He lay twisted and bloodied in the tall wet grass, about a pogo jump away from the van. The sole surviving headlights searched the dark, empty sky for answers. The music, for want of a better word, played on, indifferent to the distress its sound source had just endured. This miserable song, although capturing the current mood, was barely audible from the road above. The tow truck, Sam Brannigan's Recovery, was already busy reeling in the steel cable that was attached to the undercarriage of 40%'s crashed van, well before the emergency services arrived. The diesel engine driving the rotary drum to rewind the cable laboured more than usual due to the thick undergrowth and the relatively steep incline. The driver of the salvage truck that morning was Larry Lungs, who was a scavenger by trade. Physically, he resembled a vulture. His diligent monitoring of the police radio 24/7 ensured that he and his cohorts would always be ahead of emergency services to the crash site. He didn't speak per se. There was no volume control for his larynx, so he bellowed instead. Every utterance, even a whisper, was a holler. Ribs O'Reilly was his right-hand man and equally deficient in moral fibre. This man donated all his teeth in exchange for the ultimate smack high. He was a chain smoker, and with his head forever engulfed in smoke, an eyewitness would have had a hard time identifying him in a lineup. As a safety precaution, any siphoning of gas was performed exclusively by Larry Lungs. Accompanying these two reprobates on these nocturnal missions was the perfect specimen of a human being, fit and healthy, except for one snag. Iron Man Mandy, as she was affectionately known, sported hermodiaphragmatic genitalia. In other words, his balls were nearly as big as her tits. This muscular package, with muscles where muscles should not be, was laminated from head to toe in matte black spandex, leaving absolutely nothing to the imagination. A mere pimple had nowhere to hide from this skin-tight veneer. With black matte goggles, gloves and custom footwear, capped in a dull black helmet moulded to the shape of its aerodynamic brain, this shadow of a man had no skin and if it had, it was reluctant to show. The streamlined bodysuit with its complement of accoutrements made sense only when paired with the multi-geared high-speed, matte black titanium, broken arrow bicycle that was strapped to the flatbed only moments before they arrived on the scene. This early drop of he, she and machine not only severed any connection with the recovery vehicle, it allowed Iron Man Mandy to approach the crash site covertly and once given the signal go about his/her business of lifting the crash victim's valuables, unfazed by injuries or fatalities, solely concerned with speed and stealth. Once they arrived at the scene, Larry Lungs would locate the person who alerted the authorities. Normally this person would be attempting to comfort the victim, but as soon as someone arrived, the normal tendency for the Good Samaritan would be to eagerly hand over the reins and disconnect from any further involvement. Of course, there was always the headstrong, gung-ho, wannabe saviour of the universe who wouldn't let go. On these rare occasions, Iron Man Mandy was obliged to stand down. Iron Man Mandy would get the all-clear signal from Larry Lungs, and she would bolt into action, plunder the victim and the crash site at a blistering pace and silently slither back into the darkness. She had her saddlebags packed with booty and was well on her way by the time the emergency services arrived. From the rear, no one, male or female, would be admonished for lusting after such a perfect, well-toned, rounded ass. But no one ever got to see anything. This team relied on the shock factor and the trauma of the crash to cloak their piracy. It was only when the injured parties recovered from their ordeal did they notice that their valuables were missing. They might recall the shadow-like figure with reptilian features, the aerodynamic brain with goggled eyes, and of course the substantial genitalia of both sexes as it rummaged about in the dark. They might even attempt a description. Most victims, however, conceded defeat, realising how incredible their account of events seemed to be in the retelling. Since the emergency services and the recovery team disavowed any knowledge of a tall reptilian-like individual, they got that raised eyebrow look that the redneck gets from the local sheriff by his insistence that he had Bigfoot in the crosshairs of his hunting rifle, or that an alien from Jupiter had stolen one of his kidneys. An empty bottle of wild turkey is normally the author of such fiction. Larry Lungs always filled a box with token items of the victim's property, which he presented to the police at the crash site. He did this to avert any suspicion of theft by the recovery team. This particular box contained an orange woolly hat, a tennis ball, the hickledy-pickledy-daisy chain of broken artefacts, several country and western CDs, and a microwave oven. The saddlebags strapped to Iron Mandy's bicycle were a lot more bountiful than the worthless items in the policeman's box. They contained a pair of binoculars, a chess set, a gold cross and chain, a wristwatch, an envelope with €480 stuffed inside, 40% pay for the week, his wallet, and one pair of nylons which Iron Man Mandy surely had first dibs on. She liked the feel of Maxie's backpack. The quality of the material was superb. It had oodles of storage compartments, but what threw it over the edge was the positioning of its water bottle holder. It was placed in the middle, the centre of the backpack, rather than to the side. This ergo-dynamic leg up would shave milliseconds off her time in her next race. Both her organs were sexually aroused. She discarded her backpack in the bushes. She paid no heed to the contents and strapped the superior American-made model to her broad back. Since Iron Mandy arrived during the intermission of the show, she had no way of knowing that the whole plot revolved around that rusty metal box which she carried on her back. This box was now stripped of all its grandeur and mystique, never again to be treated like treasure unless it crossed the paths of a select few individuals acquainted with its history. Maxie, Jessie, Ida, Debbie, and the coma head 40%. Maxie was doing his damn best to keep Dandelion off that list. Larry Lungs secured the crash van with felt straps wrapped around the wheels and tightened by winches to the flatbed of the truck. He didn't have an opportunity yet to siphon the gas. Too many people milling about. Rest assured that gas tank would be bone dry before it reached the depot. That was one of Larry Lung's pet peeves. Ribs O'Reilly gathered up all the debris caused by the crash and tossed it in the van. He swept up the glass from the laneway. By now, 7 local farmers dotted the scene, each one rendering his or her take on the accident. It was quite apparent that the driver was at fault, so no investigation was necessary. The 2 policemen on the scene made a few inquiries and jotted down notes in their pads just for show. These notes were discarded the minute they left the scene. In the meantime, 40% himself was strapped to a stretcher in the back of an ambulance on his way at high speed, which is the only way he ever travelled that road, to the ER at Melody Township Hospital, about 8 miles away. One of the medics hovered over him, checking his vitals. An oxygen mask had been placed over his mouth and he was connected to an IV drip. He was unconscious and beaten up bad. He was very lucky to be alive. Sam Brannigan's recovery truck pulled into the depot yard a little after sunrise and Larry Lungs parked it in the blind spot of the security cameras. He instructed the smoky head of O'Reilly to stand clear while he siphoned the gas from the crashed van. When he was done, he put the gas tank and the length of tube in the back of his battered pickup truck and covered it with an old blanket. If that old blanket could talk, it would put these 2 beauties behind bars for a long time. He went off to the office and hung the tow truck's keys on its own hook next to Sambuca Brannigan's desk. The key rack was screwed on the wall about waist height. It looked like the carpenter made a mistake. But the light switches, the doorknobs, the desk, the toilet bowl, the sink and the kitchenette countertop were also positioned low, which suggested that this carpenter should find another line of work or Buca Brannigan was a midget. Not only that, but as his name implied, he was also a flaming alcoholic. Larry Lungs and Ribs O'Reilly travelled together in the beat-up pickup truck. They were headed for Dago Dunes, which was a small, self-contained little island about 30 minutes drive east on Ballad Road towards the ocean. No cars were permitted on the island and the only access was by ferry. When they arrived at the dock, Larry Lungs parked the pickup truck and went along with Ribs and his smoky head to the ticket counter. 2 return tickets, he bellowed at the timid ticket agent. Everyone within earshot, which in Larry Lungs' case was extensive, stopped whatever they were doing to brace themselves for trouble. Anyone that loud was surely going to rock the boat. He paid for 2 tickets and boarded the ferry. No one came within an ass's roar of them, yet no one let either one out of their sight. 2 workmen with their toolboxes on the floor in front of them sat 3 rows of seats ahead. They were smoking and drinking coffee. 3 young Polish cleaning ladies with mops and buckets giggled away among themselves at the front of the ferry. A group of 5 young handsome men, impeccably groomed and dressed to the nines, sat in 2 separate rows of seats towards the rear. The 2 men in front had turned around to face the others. They laughed and joked and were very touchy-feely with each other, which didn't seem to bother anybody. Sitting alone by the big battleship grey sliding door was an ugly man in a tight-fitting dress, which to be honest did nothing for his figure. He had a 5 o'clock shadow at 8 o'clock in the morning as he applied his lipstick, referencing his progress in a compact mirror. His handbag clashed with his scarf. One thing for sure, he wouldn't get far on Dago Dunes without somebody indicating that fashion inventory faux pas. To be continued.
Well,